Welcome to the TELLAB's Optical LAN Advanced Procedures video, Configuring Policy via Radius Authentication. This video is part 2 of a series that will define how to set up the system to use NAC in conjunction with Radius Authentication and 8021X to define the services or policy on a user port. Specifically, this video will deal with the typical configuration steps and panorama for a NAC setup. The topics covered in this training video include provisioning the VLANs for services to be used, enabling global 8021X port-based access control, and provisioning and assigning related port profiles. The first step is to configure all of the VLANs to be used by the system into the OLT using the switching view of the Panorama EMS. The VLANs need to be added to the VLAN properties. Using the VLAN Properties tab, select the Create button and create an entry for each VLAN that you intend to use. VLAN ranges should not be used when using external policy engines, and all VLANs should be named. Typically, the policy engines will be enabling access to the VLAN, and so the default ACL mode for all VLANs should typically be Basic ACL Default Deny. Next, assign the VLANs to specific uplink interfaces, or LAGs, via the VLAN Assignment tab. The next step is to configure the system to enable 8021X authentication. The system will not authenticate users unless this is configured. The 8021X port authentication settings are reached by right-clicking on the OLT within the common tree, then selecting the menu item, Protocols, Port Authentication. You should click the checkbox, Enable 8021X Port-Based Access Control. Set up the Radius server IP address and shared key. This defines the values for the Radius profile name default. The DAC hostname IP address defines the dynamic authorization client, which is used to provide many of the Radius extensions used by policy engines in configuration. Typically, this is the policy engine address. It is best practice to ensure that the Radius hostname and DAC hostname are listed in the same order, as in most systems the Radius and DAC are fulfilled by the same agent. Therefore, ordering them in the same order ensures that both parts of an authentication go to the same agent. The DAC UDP port is typically set to the standard default 3799. If host names are used for Radius or DAC agents, then you will need to configure the DNS entry on the OLT to allow the OLT to resolve the host names to IP addresses. The DNS entry can be reached by right-clicking the OLT and selecting Properties and the General tab. Select Enable DNS to enable the DNS service. Add one or more DNS servers. If desired, set the default domain. Click Apply to save the changes. You will need to define an ACL profile to be used once a user or device is authorized that does not restrict the traffic on the port. To create this ACL, go to Profiles, the ACL tab. Select Create a New Profile. This ACL is typically named Permit All Traffic and should match the ACL filter ID. The ACL is a basic ACL type with a permit action. Select Authorize MAC as the source MAC. Set maximum MACs to 1 so that only the MAC attempting to be authorized is allowed. Then save the ACL. This service profile shows an example that might be used for user data for a particular floor. It will specify the VLAN for that geographic location. The policy engine will profile the user or device, characterize it, and apply the profile match filter ID for data and the profile assigned to the port that is prefixed with data will be selected. The policy engine only knows its user data, but doesn't need to know the specific VLAN. A strong naming convention should be used in profile naming to ensure an architecture that is easy to maintain. Other profile match filter IDs might be VoIP, camera, printer, and guest. The service type must be bridged. The service is typically untagged for user data ports. If the VLAN has been set for basic default deny, there will need to be an ACL assigned. The policy engine will later replace this with an ACL appropriate to the compliant state of the port. NAC profiles allow a set of service profiles to be assigned to the port. The policy engine will pick from the profiles assigned to the port. The following attributes are key to the proper operation. Use the default VLAN box to assign all relevant service profiles. If any devices will be authenticated via MAC bypass, enable this function. This is typically needed for devices that don't support 802.1x, such as phones and printers. The startup delay should not be changed from the 30 seconds, as this should change the order in which authentication methods occur. PAE dynamic services must be enabled to allow port authorization on the port. Filter ID is required for assignment of the profile by radius or a policy engine. Enable authentication fail allows the specification of a quarantine VLAN which be assigned to the user port if radius sends back an access reject message to an authentication attempt. Create a PAE profile to be assigned to all ports where you wish to support 802.1x, MAB, or have a policy engine manage the port. Set the admin state to enabled, which enables 802.1x MAB for the policy engine. Maximum authorized supplicants should be set to the number of 802.1x devices allowed to authorize on the port, typically never changed from the default of 1. MAB devices and 802.1x devices are separately counted, so a phone and a PC can still be authorized on the same port with the default value of 1. For proper LLDP operation, set to enable to allow the system to send LLDP to the attached device. Phones depend on this to get their VLAN information. LLDP med capabilities is set to enable to allow sending of capabilities to the far end. Network policy must be enabled to allow the sending of the VLAN found in the filter ID, tunnel ID, egress VLAN ID, radius attributes to be communicated. LLDP VLAN assignment delay needs to be set to 60 to ensure that phones have sufficient time to get the LLDP data and get on the proper VLAN prior to getting an IP on the voice VLAN. Power via MDI should be set if you have any devices that require LLDP to negotiate power settings. When using a policy engine to do the configuration dynamically upon user login, all the ports on a floor or geographic region will usually be set to the same profile assignments. The most efficient way to accomplish this is to use the Profile and Admin State tool to bulk assign profiles to the port. First, highlight all of the ports that you wish to modify. Then right-click, select Profile and Admin State. Here, all the attributes of the selected ports can be assigned at the same time. Set the admin state to enabled. Assign the NAC profile for this floor geographic region. Assign the PAE profile that enables the PAE process on the port. And also enable the LLDP profile that enables LLDP. Once all of the desired profiles are selected, click Apply to save. This concludes this video. In it, we have discussed provisioning the VLANs for services to be used, enabling global 802.1x port-based access control, and provisioning and assigning related port profiles.